we stop moralizing our emotions, when we stop saying that some of them are good and some of them are bad, and we say instead, emotions are information. Something is out of alignment, something hurts. In the same way our body swells when there's an injury because it's trying to heal, that's just information.
Welcome back to the Happiness in Progress podcast. I'm your host, Danielle Craig. I'm an Emmy Award-winning journalist, a mom, wife, and you know what I like to say, just a person looking for more joy in the everyday. This podcast is brought to you by the Mail Tribune. You can find more podcasts at mailtribune.com. Today, you are going to be hearing from Mandy Capehart. She's an author, speaker, and certified grief and life coach in the Pacific Northwest. She is the founder of the Restorative Grief Project, an online community of grievers and grief supporters looking for movement while they heal. Her first book is titled Restorative Grief, Embracing Our Losses Without Losing Ourselves. It is coming up on the 1-year anniversary of that book release. You can hear more about Mandy's grief work on her podcast, Restorative Grief with Mandy Capehart, and also you can listen to the podcast she co-hosts, the Uncomfortable Grace podcast. Today we talked about what restorative grief is, how Mandy came up with this idea when we set a timeline, a 2-week timeline to get out of the pandemic. She's going to explain how that relates to the same timelines we set for ourselves when we experience some kind of loss. She talks about how grief shifts us. She shares how it shifted her when she lost her mom. She also shares how to create a non-judgmental space to grieve and how to become present through grief, that and so much more. So let's get to it. Mandy, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. I'm so excited to finally get you on.
Oh, you're very welcome. I know we've been trying for a while and it's meant to be, obviously, because here we are.
Now is the time.
Yeah.
Tell me, we're going to jump right in. What is restorative grief?
Oh, it's a whole mess of things, isn't it? Restorative grief was the baby of my heart that came out of both the pandemic and when everything shut down in 2020 and I lost my job and I decided I'm homeschooling. I got to figure out what to do with my life. A lot of things coalesced at once. So I've always wanted to be a writer. I've always been a writer, I should say. And in 2016, I lost my mom. She was one of countless losses, but probably the most significant, of course, especially at that point. And I decided as we were watching the world say it's a 2-week shutdown, then we'll be back to normal. I considered the fact that that's never been true of grief ever. And yet here's that 2-week time frame where people think like, oh, 2 weeks and now you're back to normal, right? I realized it was just a world of untended grief ahead of us that I didn't want to be a part of. I wanted to do something that contributed growth and that contributed healing to this generation of trauma we're about to encounter and that we are watching play out. So restorative grief became the way that I decided I'm going to tell my story. The title, I kept wrestling with it for a long time. And yet at the end, I recognized it to be the most valuable part of it because we have this idea that grief is a 5-stage process. You know, we go from denial to anger to bargaining to depression to acceptance. And it's just not truth. Anybody who's experienced grief can tell you it's cyclical, it's not linear. And not only that, acceptance is not the last step. It's not the last part. It's not where we end. And so what I found in my own grief process and through the book, you see as well my story of finding restoration, finding what works to bring me back into alignment with who I am, mind, heart, body, and spirit, and finding a way to express what that looks like to move forward through my life, integrating my loss rather than compartmentalizing and minimizing it away. So the book was the jumping point for restorative grief. The brand, I guess you could say, with coaching and with the podcast that I'm leading and all the other pieces, because I just want us to recognize there is restoration available, even though grief lasts a lifetime.
I love how you put the 2-week shutdown. Because I know we all do this. We do this when we're sick. I did this when I had my concussion. Like, okay, I'm going to give it 10 days and I would be a normal person. We do it with everything. We put some kind of time parameter on when we're going to be better. Yeah. No matter what it is. How important is it that we realize that there's not a time parameter on grief?
I mean, it's crucial. I think until we recognize it, we won't stop expecting it of other people and ourselves. We've got a world that needs that shift in their mindset, whether it's bereavement pay at the federal level changing. I don't know if you've heard about that argument, but it keeps getting shut down. or, the different ways that we treat each other. And my book touches a lot about faith practices, because in my experience, even the church doesn't understand, just the global church does not understand how we shift internally when we have lost, when we have experienced grief of any form, whether it's a disappointment, a death, a miscarriage, a relationship falling apart, a move. There are over 40 places, I think way more, of sources of grief in our lives. And the more that we practice extending grace to one another and drop our expectations of returning to that same self that we were, the more we'll realize we aren't the same person. We've lost something. No matter what it looks like, we are changed, we are shifted. And so part of recapturing who we are in light of that understanding is helping the people around us understand, listen, you can't expect me to do what I've always done. If I was a former Olympic athlete and I broke both of my legs and can no longer run, you can't expect me to make a 4-minute mile. You have to have a different set of understanding of who I am while I'm grieving, that I can't do that anymore. So that's the whole part of why I really got into it, was the grief literacy factor, was knowing that the more that I educate both myself and the people around me, the more people in the world are going to grasp that concept of, we have to make space for grief to exist, because it's the same side of the coin of life, right? It flips for both of us, for all of us.
I think anytime that I've grieved some kind of loss, regardless of what it is, one of the things that has been hardest for me moving forward is that wanting to be the same person I was before the loss. Like the loss, there's the loss, and then there's the loss of who I was as well.
Yep.
And you mentioned asking, people around you to have understanding for that Olympic athlete with a broken whatever. How can one person do that for themselves? Give that grace to themselves?
It's a process, to be sure. That secondary loss of self, that sense of understanding of where we fit in the world, are losses that come almost daily. We don't recognize them until we're right up on top of them. And I have found that both for myself and in my work with clients, letting ourselves reevaluate what we hold precious, what our values are, is where we can start to find where we've come out of alignment with ourselves and find our way back to ourselves. So the restorative grief model, it looks at who we are: heart, mind, body, and spirit, that we're 4 pieces of a whole. And of course, you could have a lot more pieces, but when you have a few core values that you hold to, you can recognize where you are acting in integrity with those values, or where you're out of integrity, right? So if my value is curiosity, it would be really easy for me to stop curiosity and just become accusatory in my thoughts, in my heart. But when I become curious, I'm allowed then to look at what I'm experiencing and say, wait, who I am is this person, or who I want to be is this person, but I'm acting over here because I'm in pain, because I'm grieving, because I'm ashamed, whatever I'm feeling that's getting all the attention. It's just giving me information to try and find my way back into alignment with who I want to be. And so I find that where we feel very stuck in our grief process is where we feel that we have not had the opportunity to express or discover who we are. And that's a big part of it. You can't move forward if you don't know the direction you're heading, and you don't know where you're going if you don't know who you are. So a lot of it comes down to really nitty-gritty identity work, which I personally love, but I know very well that I'm dealing with grievers who are already in disarray. And so it's a slow, steady process. So I hope that was a snippet to say, oh, here's exactly the steps, the formula you can do if you're grieving, to give yourself 2 weeks. More than 2 weeks.
Yeah, right. Not going to be 2 weeks. I think even in grief, even if you knew who you were before, I think even in grief, it's so easy to lose yourself because you've lost something that was a part of you, even if that's another person that's a part of you. And it's hard to find that pathway forward.
Yeah, we define ourselves in relationship to other people, unquestionably. And so that becomes the idea of, well, my path forward always looked like being a mom of like 5 or 6 kids and having married parents that I would go home to every Sunday with my whole clan, and we'd have big Sunday dinners. Well, my parents divorced when I was little. We moved across the country, or across the state. Then I had a ton of infertility. Then my mom died. So I have 1 baby, 1 parent, no home to go to. That's like all of the dreams and visions of who I thought I would become were derailed by things I couldn't control. And that recognition of our lack of influence and lack of control, or lack of certainty, which most people really push back on, uh, is the starting point for realizing this is something we will all experience. The hard part is we are facing our lives and this idea of our lives and our idea of ourself in a world that does not accept grief, that does not make space for it, that really glorifies life and good vibes only and hopeful, positive mantras and finding purpose in your pain. And I flinch every time I hear those, not because they're necessarily a bad thing, but because they can be harmful. And the more that we can remove the moralizing of grief, right? Good or bad, right? We can move into, is it helpful or is it harmful? And I think our sense of self really benefits from that because we stop shaming ourselves for things that we feel or experience or believe to be true about loss or the afterlife
Mhm.
or anything that we're experiencing. But it's not an easy process.
No. So what was, as you've gone through all these things, what was the beginning of that process for you as you shifted?
Mm. Well, when my mom died, I was leading worship that morning. I got a
Mhm.
call. We had two sets, and I got a call in between sets, and I answered it. And my aunt was saying, "Hey, you need to hurry up." So I had a choice to decide to leave right then and there, or to follow through on my commitment to lead worship and stay. And I stayed.
Mm.
And I ended up planning meals to take care of my family. I got on a plane, and I was 30 minutes too late to see my mom off. And I spent that next week really just letting myself experience what I needed to, but also do the practical parts of grieving and mourning and after the effects of picking things up and going to the funeral home with my aunt and all of the things that you have to do. And on the plane ride home, I had a moment where I just said, "All right, God, I'm either all in or I'm out." Because up until that point, the belief structure I had functioned within had me believing that if I had just laid hand on my mom and prayed more, this wouldn't have happened. If I
Mhm.
had just asked for more prayer, if my mom hadn't been so private, if we'd known sooner, if the doctor, all the blame, all of
Mhm.
it. So I ended up deciding, okay, I'm all in. I'm a passionate person. I'm not someone who backs off of a challenge. So I ended up going on this weekend retreat with women I didn't know. I joined Camp 17 with my friends Lou and Chantel, who are, of course.
Mhm.
And I just poured myself into all these really intense situations where I could find the baseline for myself again. I have always been this strong arm, push your way through person. And I decided it was time to let that go because it obviously didn't serve me well in this instance. It just protected me from feeling things really well. And it probably took 2 or 3 years of talking about loss and leading women's fight night and all of these speaking events where I was finally faced with myself to the point of, now what? Now I've moved through so much and I'm speaking on it, but what do I want to do with this? And how am I going to create meaning from this? Because that's always been what's driven me is create meaning, find life abundant and bring others into it. And up until I started doing this grief work, I realized so much of what I was leading and creating and building was not, it wasn't serving who I was anymore. And so
Mhm.
back to your point of you lose sight of who you were. Well, you transform into someone new. It's just a matter of whether or not that someone is somebody you can accept and appreciate and rejoice within and be humble enough to say like, oh man, I had to fall apart, and this is not perfection, and this is not that great, to be honest.
Mhm.
All the time this is often messy and traumatized
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
dealing with all the things. So
Mhm. How can someone create a space of non-judgment for themselves as they grieve?
I think that begins with the people around you.
Mhm.
You have to control the narrative to the extent that you can by recognizing that your story is yours. It doesn't belong to anyone else. You don't
Mhm.
owe it to anyone else, and you don't owe anyone access to you as you grieve. I think that's one thing I found very prevalent, and I'm sure you can agree. In our culture, we have a lot of people who show up and say, "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. What can I do?" and want to insert themselves with the most beautiful of intentions and be present for you. But they're not asking the question of, what do you need? What do
Mhm.
you want? And even if they are, they're asking it in such a way that you, as the griever, now have 32 homework assignments to figure out what you want and all these people
Yeah.
to tell. And so I have found that when you are in that place, then certainly do it prior to a grief event. Like, limit your circles. There's this great John Townsend has this great book called People Fuel, and he talks about how we we gain energy from some and don't from others. And so we have circles of access that people have to us. It's a simple concept, but in grief, we have very little resource to even give to ourselves. And so I really like the idea of eliminating down to 3 primary people. I stole this from Brene Brown and Joan Halifax. But the strong back, soft front, wild heart that they talk about embodying in ourselves, I broke that into 3 different kinds of people, where if you have someone that can be your strong back when you're grieving, that person who's willing to stand up, say no, push back, create boundaries or enforce the boundaries you've set. The wild heart, who you can call in the middle of the night, who's willing to show up for you at all times, who's like, let's spontaneously go to Disneyland and leave all of the everything behind. It's okay to compartmentalize right now. Or the soft front, who is the one that shows up and that sits with you and that can be present. And often that person is, you can have one person be those people, but it just takes invitation. So as a griever, I think it takes our invitation and agreement to whomever we want in our lives while we're suffering and trying to heal, to be intentional. That's how we control the narrative. That's how we can exert our own influence and say, in the most loving of ways, thank you for offering another casserole. I'm actually set. I'm good. I've got my people. Yeah. And I'm cared for. And that's a big deal. I think in grief, we think everybody needs to know all the things so they can have compassion for us or give us advice. When the truth is, we're extremely intuitive and we know what we need and who we need. It's just a matter of recognizing that it might not be who we expected or what we expected.
I think also when talking to too many people, it's too much. It's too much on a good day.
Right.
It's my own personal struggle. Let's talk about anger. You talked about anger in the book. You talked about this as a yellow light. Explain that to me.
Yeah. So anger is often this thing we vilified, right? We turn it into this negative emotion. We say that it's harmful. It causes rage. It causes bad behaviors. And we moralize anger to the point where we think we just can't experience it. Or if we are, we're having this spirit of anger, spirit of, what's the word I'm looking for? Detachment from people. We're creating our own problem. When the truth is, anger is a yellow light so we can pause. Anger is the reason why we can pump our brakes and recognize that there's something else we need. It's just information. And when we stop moralizing our emotions, when we stop saying that some of them are good and some of them are bad, and we say instead, emotions are information. Something is out of alignment, something hurts. In the same way our body swells when there's an injury because it's trying to heal, that's just information. So anger lets me know that, hey, there's something beneath this that's hurting that needs attention. And in my anger, I can choose to blow up, or in my anger, I can say, pump the brakes. I'm really angry. I don't know what's going on yet. And I'm going to take a step back. And that is where we start to uncover the other things that are hidden beneath anger. It could be jealousy. It could be fear. It could be heartbreak. It could be loneliness. It could be trauma. It could be feeling deserted. It could be feeling betrayed. There are so many emotions that we just don't have the language for. And allowing anger to exist, even allowing it to be expressed in a safe way where people aren't being harmed, it's opening the bottle. It's opening the cork on the bottle, right? After it's been shaken, you have to release. You can't just internalize, because when you do, that's when not only does your mind think constant angry thoughts and your heart feels constant angry feelings, but your body starts to manifest anger and your spirit manifests anger too. And all of that throws us so much further out of alignment. So I'm a big fan of like the rec rooms where you can release all the tension.
Yes.
And just expressing our anger, even though it's going to create more tension, because I come down to this. People are like, well, I don't want to say any that I'm angry because it'll upset them. I'm like, why? You're upset. Is it more important that they stay calm and you stay upset? Because somebody's already upset. Why not be brave? Why not get uncomfortable and confront the situation and at least be honest? Because you never know. That could be the one thing that is waiting. That could be your linchpin to healing.
Yeah. And if you're sharing that with one of those trusted people around you, they might see something you don't. Recently, I've noticed with my son, most emotions, and I loved this part of your book because I related it to my son instantly. Almost all of the emotions he has result in anger. We see anger when he's jealous, sad, left out, etc. Just this last week, we were at a baseball game and he started pulling these girls' hair, and the girls are really upset, and the girls are like, "What's your problem?" And they go tell their moms, and the moms are mad. And I sat with him and I talked to him, why are you pulling the girl's hair? And he's like, I just need to make a potion with their hair because I'm mad at them and I'm angry. And I had noticed maybe 20 minutes before they were all playing just fine. And then one girl had a Skittle and shared it with each kid except for him. And so I said, hey, I think this might have something to do with you feeling left out. What happened with the candy? What happened with the Skittles? And he said, she shared them. She shared them with everyone except for me. And all of a sudden the anger just fell away. And it was just about, he felt left out. And I know this is like, it's a very small story, especially with what we're talking about, but to see it every day in the little things of being wounded and having anger show up, it's really, I've seen with my son, incredible to see what's actually beneath the anger.
It's not a small thing either, though, because grief really is present in our everyday lives. We've just trained ourselves to look for only what feels good or what feels life-giving. And especially in the church world, it can be really easy to focus on life and focus on joy and positive emotions, or less, or I guess comfortable emotions, when the reality is we're longing to be seen and to see each other and to be welcomed in and included. And even your son feeling overlooked and rejected and dismissed by his peers, that's a huge grief event. And if we can equip our generation that's coming up behind us to be emotionally intelligent about grief, especially, it's a game changer. Like that's what I want for my daughter too, is to have this idea that she can go up to someone and say, I'm not ashamed that I'm crying. I'm ashamed that we can't get together and find common ground. I'm like devastated that we aren't able to connect and build a relationship or find ourselves back in relationship because of one little misunderstanding, because anger is self-protection.
Yeah.
It's just,
oh my goodness. It is. Yes.
it's just telling us, hey, this hurts and I want to be safe and I don't feel safe right now.
So with my son, we ended up having this conversation and he went over to the girls and he said, hey, I'm sorry I pulled your hair. I was feeling really left out because you shared candy with everyone except for me. And it kind of made me feel bad. And then I pulled your hair. And the girls, they said, they said, and I didn't even ask them. I think one of them was 4 or 5. And she said, I'm so sorry I didn't share my Skittles with you. And it was just really, really sweet. And it was really like a powerful moment where we could discuss how we actually felt. And I hope, as you say, that this turns into a way that we can communicate with each other as adults. It changes the conversation.
It does. And I found a lot of people in my life, and this is going to sound pretty terrible, but there've been a lot of people that I realized I can't be around anymore. Not because they're harmful people, not because they're negative, but because I expect a certain level of emotional intelligence and being able to come at a thing head on. I am not a delicate flower. I am definitely someone that comes up against. And so I know that that is hard for a lot of people, but when there is conflict, I will be tactful and loving, but I will be direct. And I think that that is something that as we get older and as we recognize how grief is interwoven into everything we do, those characteristics of people who are willing to be honest, even when it is devastating, even when it is not devastating, I guess, honest when it is necessary, but not to the point of like inserting opinion, meaning I see that this is harmful, or I'm observing this, whatever that is, or this is what has happened to me. And I just want to express my honesty. I think that that's where we can break out of all of these places where we think that people should be over grief or should be able to move on or stop feeling bad, or all the awful platitudes, things that people are saying to each other.
Yeah, right. Okay. In the very beginning of this conversation, you said acceptance doesn't exist. You talk about it too with closure in the book. Tell me a little bit about your thoughts on that.
Well, I know that it's divisive because there are a lot of people who say, sure, there is. I got closure and it's fine. But I think of closure in a way of an end. Closure and acceptance is, okay, this is done and over with. And I can accept that my mother has passed away, or that I've had miscarriages, or that my future isn't going to be what I thought it was. But that doesn't mean that my grief around it is over. It might mean that the mourning period has come to an end, or that the active grieving work isn't necessarily happening every day. But I really feel strongly that the more we spend our time searching for closure, the more we miss about who we are and who we are becoming along the way. If we look for the opportunity to just shut the book and be done, how much of the book have we retained? How much have we incorporated into our lives? What have we learned and actually used to propel ourselves forward in a new way as new people, because we are new people experiencing completely new things. And if we continue to just say like, well, it's fine, they died, or I lost that job, or that relationship ended, there's acceptance in the sense of course you accept that this thing happened. You don't have to consistently just deny that that was ever a thing. That's not, that definition is a little too black and white. But the point is, I like the idea, the word closure, just because it, I don't know, I've come to a lot of healing with my mom, even after losing her, even after she's been gone from this planet. I've had time with myself and in my journal where I've recognized new things and found ways to become closer with her, even after the fact. So I don't know. I think closure just blocks us from believing that life is more integrative and vast than that black and white, okay, one and done, grieved, moved on perspective would have us.
I was
hold
just
on
talking
to.
about this in another episode with another person, that when we focus only on what our human brains can totally retain and understand 100%, we lose a lot of the growth. And like you said, like that relationship, being able to be closer with your mom after she passed away, that is, if you only rely on the human facts of what our brain can retain, then you miss out on that. Yeah, that's
And
really
that's
beautiful.
what, thank you. I think that that's where that alignment piece of heart, mind, body, spirit really comes into it, is my body and my spirit and my mind and my heart are going to experience things so differently than one another. And yet they can all be impacted really intentionally by one event and experience it all, manifest it all differently. And so the more that we recognize like, I'm not a simple pile of atoms that have just happened to come across one
Right.
another, and like it's not just so chaotic and random, the more I grasp the ability to see and learn about nuance in my life.
Okay, I want to read part of your book. Okay, quote, resting in the present may sound like torture, but we've tried to avoid it and we still end up on this road, even after dragging our feet. And we've tried sprinting away from it, but we cannot outrun the life we lead. Present is the only true option. You go on to say, running hard and fast toward healing will disconnect us from ourselves, mind, body, and soul. End quote. It's hard to stay in the present when you're grieving.
Oh yeah, it's the worst
How do you,
place.
yeah, it's the place where it all is there.
Yeah.
What is your advice to someone as they are grieving and trying to outrun the grief?
I think knowing that you're in a safe place is crucial. And that's not true for most people. There are many people I work with who don't have the privilege of time to set aside, to take off of work, to be alone. It's the number one thing you need to be able to become present. And so when I encounter people who say, well, I don't have, that's nice that you can take a vacation, or it's nice that you have a friend to talk to, but I'm alone. I don't have any friends and family. Those are the sources of my loss and my trauma. And I work, 80 hours a week. My best advice is, when do you shower? When do you go to the bathroom? When do you have an intimate moment where you truly are alone for 1 minute? And it's okay in those 1 minute intervals to say, I'm just going to sit here and not try to do or think of anything else. Meditating and being present with yourself isn't about clearing your mind and emptying everything, because that's impossible. The difference being, if you can sit in a place where you know you are physically safe and create psychological safety for yourself, a moment to breathe, a moment to let your hands fall open, a moment to say a prayer, a moment to cry, a moment, a moment. It doesn't have to be a week at a monastery of silence. It has to be these little tiny pieces that you steal away, because as you do that, you're starting to equip yourself to get off of the cycle, the path that you're on where you just keep stuffing it away. And as you continue walking on a familiar path where it feels like grief never ends, or you're back where you started, you'll notice, oh, wait a minute, there's a little path that trails off that I practiced meditating that day for 2 minutes. Oh, that's a tool that I have. Okay, but I'm still on this path. But I'm going to come back around and be like, wait, I did it for 2 minutes. Oh my gosh, I have 5 minutes before I have to leave the house. Okay. And those moments are, to me, where we become so present and learn how to advocate for ourselves where we need it the most, because no one else, as much as they say they're with us and for us and championing us, no one else could create that for us. We don't have the capacity to create it for everyone around us. We have to, especially when we're that's another conversation. We're trained to not really do it for ourselves first. We're trained to do it for others. So how do we, that's how I think we do it for ourselves, is we steal the moments until we recognize, wow, our muscles are really growing in this arena. Okay. I'm noticing my anger and I'm pausing. That's a moment of being present. Like even just recognizing your successes as you go through the day. I was
Mhm.
triggered by that thing and I didn't want to punch him in the face. Okay, great. That's a moment of becoming present with yourself. And so the more we do that, the more we see, oh, that is who I want to be. And boop, that's alignment. That's coming right back into who we are.
Mhm. Mhm. That's really wonderful. Meditation is life-giving. I love it. Okay, I've loved talking to you, Mandy. I want to end with my question I ask everyone. What is your number one tip for finding more joy in the good, the bad, and the in-between?
Hmm. Learning to stay present with the uncomfortable things. I think I find it so funny. I know that sounds terrible, but when things are uncomfortable, you know that Bare Naked Lady song, I'm the kind of guy that laughs at a funeral.
Mhm.
I find so much joy in recognizing that there's discomfort in life and pressing into it and watching how people react, not for the sake of being masochistic or evil or anything like that, for the sake of recognizing there is beauty in every aspect of this created world around us and who we are, in the complex, in the discomforting, in the confusing, in the mystery of it all. And the more that we are willing to say like, oh, this is uncomfortable, I wonder what's going to happen, the more that wonder of who we were as children comes back to the surface. And we become these like fascinating, inspiring, curious, hopeful, non judgmental people that I think make the world go round. So I say get uncomfortable.
Yeah, I love that. It can be hard, but it's important.
Mhm.
Andy, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I love what you're
You're
doing, and
welcome.
I think it's so important what you're doing in this space and changing the conversation.
Oh, thank you, Danielle. I appreciate it. And I loved being here with you.
I hope you appreciated this conversation with Mandy. You can find her book and all of her information, how to get in touch with her, when you go to show notes. Thanks for being here on Happiness in Progress.